The silence was a language I had spoken for 22 years. It was a dense, heavy blanket I had pulled over my head after the accident, a world of muffled sounds and muted colors where grief could live undisturbed. For 22 years my son, Leo, had only ever known me this way. A quiet presence in the corner of his life, a pair of hands that cooked and cleaned and signed checks, a face that could smile or frown but never, ever speak a word. He grew up with my silence, learned to navigate it, and then, to take it for granted. He mistook the absence of my voice for the absence of my mind, my will, my worth. He thought the blanket that smothered me was also a blindfold, that I couldn't see him for what he had become. That was his greatest mistake. My voice was gone, but my memory was perfect. I remembered everything. I remembered the weight of my husband David's hand in mine, the warm, calloused feel of it, a constant anchor in my world. We were sitting on the porch of the small house we'd bought with more hope than money, watching a 5-year-old Leo chase fireflies in the deepening twilight. "He's got your fire, Elara," David had said, his voice a low, rumbling laugh that vibrated right through me. My own laughter had spilled out then, bright and effortless, joining his in the summer air. "And your stubbornness," I'd retorted, leaning my head against his shoulder. God help us, we had a language then, David and I. It was built of laughter and late-night whispers, of arguments over politics, and shared dreams for our boy. It was a vibrant, living thing. I could still feel the phantom shape of those words in my throat, a hollow ache for a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Now, the only sound in my life was the whisper of my orthopedic slippers on the polished hardwood floors of Leo's house. A house he called his, but one my memories knew better. My world had shrunk to the size of a guest room at the back of the house, a space filled with the ghosts of my former life, David's mahogany writing desk, my overflowing sewing basket, boxes of photo albums I couldn't bring myself to discard. To my son and his wife, Monica, it was clutter. An unsightly collection of relics they politely tolerated. To me, it was the last bastion of my identity. Each morning, I would wake to the sterile quiet of their minimalist home. They preferred shades of grey and white, surfaces kept bare, a life curated for a magazine spread. There was no room for the joyful chaos of a lived-in home, no space for the past. I would make my way to the kitchen, the chill of the marble countertops seeping into my bones. I'd make coffee, the aroma filling the silent space, and I would leave a cup for Leo on the counter, just the way he liked it, with a splash of cream and no sugar. It was a ritual, a small, unspoken act of love. Or perhaps, by then, it was just habit. He would usually grab it without looking at me, his eyes glued to his phone, murmuring a distracted "Thanks, Ma," the words tossed over his shoulder like loose change. Monica was different. She didn't ignore me, she managed me. She would leave brightly colored sticky notes on the refrigerator. "Elara, please remember to use the coasters. Elara, the organic kale is for our smoothies, not for your soup. Elara, the cleaning service comes on Thursday. Please try to keep your room tidy." Each note was a tiny paper cut to my dignity, a reminder that I was a guest, project, a problem to be solved. She spoke to me in that slow, overly enunciated way people use for small children, or the very old, as if my inability to speak had rendered me deaf and simple-minded. "We are having salmon for dinner, Elara. You like salmon, don't you?" she'd say, smiling a tight, placid smile that never reached her cold blue eyes. I would just nod, the motion stiff, my own smile a pale imitation of what it once was. How could I explain, with my hands and my sad eyes, that I remembered a time when she was a nervous young woman trying desperately to impress my son, gushing over my pot roast and calling me Mrs. Jensen with a tremor in her voice? How could I tell her that I knew the precise cost of the designer handbag she'd slung over her chair, because I'd seen the bank statement for the joint account I still shared with Leo, an account that was supposed to be for emergencies, not for lambskin leather? I said nothing. I just ate her salmon. My only true solace was my granddaughter, Lily. She was 9 years old, a whirlwind of bright pink sneakers and messy pigtails, and she had David's perceptive eyes. She saw me. She never treated me like a broken thing. She would crawl into my lap in the evenings, bringing me a book, and chatter away about her day at school, about her friends, about the injustices of long division. She learned to read my expressions, as if they were words on a page. She understood my small huffs of amusement, the slight furrow of my brow in concern, the way my eyes would soften when she told me she loved me. We had our own language, a secret dialect of the heart. Sometimes, she would look from me to her parents, a flicker of confusion and anger in her young face. "Why are they mean to you, Grandma?" she once texted me from her tablet when her parents weren't looking. I had been sitting in my armchair, pretending to read, while Leo and Monica discussed their upcoming ski trip to Aspen. "It's just not practical to take her," Monica had said, her voice a stage whisper. "The altitude, the logistics, it's a nightmare." "She'll be happier here," Leo had agreed instantly. "Yeah, you're right. She doesn't like the cold anyway," he'd never asked. I loved the cold. I loved the snow. David and I had spent our honeymoon in a tiny cabin in Vermont, huddled by a fire, our voices hushed by the thick blanket of white outside. I typed back a simple message to Lily on my own phone: "They don't mean to be. They are just busy." It was a lie, of course. A lie to protect her from the ugliness of it all, but the truth was a bitter pill I swallowed daily. They weren't just busy. They were cruel in their carelessness, brutal in their neglect. And I was beginning to feel the first, dangerous tremor of a resentment that had lain dormant for far too long. The silence had been my shield, but I was starting to realize it was also my prison. The financial ledgers were my secret gospel. Tucked away in the bottom drawer of David's old desk, they were a testament to a life of careful planning and quiet sacrifice. After David died, after the silence fell, I discovered he had not only been a brilliant writer, but an incredibly shrewd investor. He had left us a portfolio that was modest but sturdy, a foundation upon which a future could be built. I took over its management with a ferocity born of grief. Protecting that money, making it grow, became my purpose. It was my silent way of honoring him, of continuing to provide for the son he had adored. Leo knew about the money, of course, but only in the vaguest sense. He saw it as an abstract, inexhaustible resource, a family fund he was entitled to. He had no concept of the hours I spent, long after he and Monica were asleep, tracking markets, reading reports, making calculated decisions that kept their comfortable life afloat. He didn't see the woman, who had paid for his prestigious university degree in cash, sparing him the burden of student loans that saddled his peers. I remembered the day I'd transferred the final tuition payment. I sat at that desk, the wire confirmation slip in my hand, and I felt a surge of pride. I was doing it. I was fulfilling David's dream for our son. I remembered the car, too. A sleek, silver sedan for his 21st birthday. He had wanted it so badly, had circled it in magazines, had left brochures lying around the house. "It's too much, Mom," he'd said, a rare note of genuine humility in his voice back then. I had simply smiled and handed him the keys. He'd whooped with joy, hugging me so tightly I could barely breathe. In that moment, he saw me. He saw my love. But the memory was tainted now, curdled by the knowledge of what came next. The gratitude faded, replaced by expectation. The car became just his car. The education became just his degree. My sacrifices were erased from the narrative he told himself, relegated to the forgotten preamble of his own success story. The most bitter memory, the one that scraped my insides raw, was the house. Their house. This house. When Leo and Monica decided to get married, they fell in love with a sprawling new construction in a gated community, a place far beyond the reach of two young people just starting their careers. I remember the day they showed me the brochure. Monica's eyes were shining with a covetous light. Isn't it perfect, Elara? She'd chirped. It has a gourmet kitchen. And a master suite with a sitting area. Leo looked at me, his expression a carefully crafted mix of hope and anxiety. The down payment is, well, it's a lot, Mom. We'd have to save for years. I knew what he was asking. I spent a week agonizing over it, poring over my ledgers. It was a huge sum, a significant chunk of the nest egg David had left. Taking it out felt like chipping a piece off my husband's monument. But then I looked at my son, at the future he wanted, and I thought of the fireflies and David's rumbling laugh. I wrote the check. $75,000. I slid it across the kitchen table to him, my hand steady. He stared at it, his mouth agape. Tears filled his eyes. Mom, he'd whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. We'll pay you back. I swear Monica had hugged me, her embrace surprisingly warm. Thank you, Elara. We'll make sure there's always a room for you. Always. They never paid me back a single dollar. And the promised room, over the years, began to feel less like a promise and more like a leash. My presence became a silent reproach to their independence. My clutter, my old furniture, my very quietness, clashed with the image of the dynamic, successful young couple they wanted to be. They started having friends over less. When they did, I was introduced as Leo's mom, with a brief, pat explanation. She's been through a lot. She doesn't speak. I would retreat to my room, the sound of their laughter and chatter a wall between their world and mine. I was a ghost at their feast, a feast I had paid for. The irony was so thick I could taste it. They complained about the cost of their organic groceries, while I subsisted on the dividends from stocks I'd had the foresight to buy a decade ago. They lamented the property taxes, while living in a home built on a foundation of my love and David's legacy. And I sat in my silent corner, keeping score. Not with malice, not yet, but with a growing, chilling sense of clarity. Every ignored greeting, every patronizing sticky note, every dismissive comment, was an entry in a ledger of its own, a debt of respect and love that was growing dangerously past due. The blanket of silence was beginning to fray at the edges, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the cold draft of reality on my skin. The end came on a Tuesday. It was a day like any other, grey and overcast, the sky pressing down on the manicured lawns of the neighborhood. I had just finished my quiet breakfast, and was rinsing my cup in the sink when Leo and Monica walked into the kitchen together. They didn't usually appear as a united front unless they had an announcement to make. My stomach tightened. Leo couldn't meet my eyes. He busied himself with the coffee machine, his back to me. It was Monica who spoke, her voice radiating a false, syrupy warmth that set my teeth on edge. Elara, good morning, she began, pulling out a chair at the gleaming kitchen island and patting the seat next to her. An invitation to my own execution. I dried my hands slowly, deliberately, and sat down, my posture rigid. I folded my hands on the cool marble surface and waited. Leo and I have been doing a lot of thinking, she continued, placing her hand over mine. Her skin was cool and smooth, her nails perfectly manicured. We've been worried about you. This is a big house, and you're all alone back there most of the day. It's not stimulating for you stimulating. The word hung in the air, a condescending little puff of smoke. As if I were a hamster in a cage in need of a new wheel. Leo finally turned around, leaning against the counter, a mug cradled in his hands. He still wouldn't look at me directly. What Monica is trying to say, Mom, is that we think we've found a better solution. For everyone, he took a deep breath, like a man about to jump into icy water. My company is letting me work from home permanently now, which is great. But I need a dedicated office space. A real one. And Monica wants to set up a home gym. You know, for her Pilates. I stared at them. The home gym. The office. It clicked into place with the cold, hard finality of a deadbolt. My room. They wanted my room. They wanted David's desk and my photo albums and my entire world gone, so Monica could stretch on a $500 yoga mat, and Leo could take important video calls. Monica, seeing my stillness, plowed ahead, her voice taking on an even more soothing, patronizing tone. "We've found the most wonderful place, Ilara. It's called the Willow Creek Senior Residence. It's more like a resort, really. They have activities. Pottery classes, book clubs, organized outings. You'd be with people your own age. You'd make friends." She pulled a glossy brochure from her handbag and slid it across the island towards me. The cover showed a smiling, silver-haired couple playing shuffleboard on a pristine lawn. It looked like a prison for the forgotten. I didn't touch the brochure. I looked at my son. I poured all the questions my voice could not ask into that one, long look. After everything. After the tuition, the car, the $75,000. After I raised you, loved you, sacrificed for you. This is how it ends. He finally met my gaze, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of the little boy who used to chase fireflies. There was shame in his eyes, a deep, buried shame. But it was quickly extinguished by a stubborn defensiveness. "It's for the best, Mom," he said, his voice firming up, justifying the betrayal to himself in real time. "We can't give you the care you need here. It's not fair to you. It's not fair to us, not fair to you." The silent scream of it echoed in the vast emptiness of my skull. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of that statement. He put his mug down with a sharp clink. The decision had been made. The verdict delivered. "We've already put down a deposit," Monica added, as if that settled it. "They have a room ready for you on the 1st of the month. That gives you 2 weeks to pack, 2 weeks. They were giving me 2 weeks to dismantle a life, to pack up the remnants of a great love and a greater sorrow, to vacate the space I had bought and paid for with the pieces of my own heart. I felt nothing. It was a strange, terrifying numbness, a void where a storm of rage and grief should have been. I stood up slowly. My chair made a soft scraping sound against the floor, the only protest in the room. I looked at my son, then at his wife. I gave them a single, deliberate nod. Then I turned and walked back to my room, the room that was no longer mine, and I closed the door behind me. The sound of the latch clicking into place was the loudest thing I had heard in 22 years. It was the sound of a lock breaking. It was the sound of a cage door swinging open. The first night in the hotel was the hardest. It wasn't the sterile anonymity of the room, with its bolted-down art and generic floral bedspread. It was the sheer, crushing weight of the silence. In Leo's house, the silence had been a familiar entity, a character in the daily drama. It was defined by the sounds it displaced, the family dinners I wasn't part of, the conversations that stopped when I entered a room, the life that went on without me. Here, in this beige box on the side of a highway, the silence was absolute. It was a vacuum, and into that vacuum rushed 22 years of unspoken pain. I hadn't gone to the Willow Creek Senior Residence. My nod of acquiescence had been a lie, the first one I had ever consciously told my son. When the taxi I'd called picked me up from his curb, I had simply handed the driver a slip of paper with the address for an extended stay hotel on the other side of town, a place I had researched and booked online with a prepaid credit card, severing another invisible financial tie. I watched Leo's perfect house shrink in the rearview mirror until it was gone, and I didn't feel sadness. I felt a strange, hollow lightness. I sat on the edge of the stiff, unfamiliar bed, and the memories I had so carefully compartmentalized came flooding back, no longer content to stay in their boxes. The car accident. It played in my mind not as a sequence of events, but as a series of brutal, sensory snapshots. The screech of tires, a sound that ripped the air in two. The smell of burning rubber, and something metallic and hot. The blinding glare of headlights where they shouldn't be. The horrifying crunch of metal folding in on itself. And David's hand, his strong, warm hand, suddenly going limp in mine. I remembered the paramedics trying to speak to me. I had opened my mouth to answer, to scream, to say his name, but nothing came out. Just a dry, rasping puff of air. The doctors called it selective mutism, a psychosomatic response to extreme trauma. My vocal cords were physically undamaged, they'd said. The wiring was fine, but the switch had been flipped. The silence was a scar on my soul that had manifested in my throat. In the lonely darkness of that hotel room, I finally admitted a truth I had buried for over 2 decades. The silence wasn't just a consequence of the trauma, it had become a penance. In the fractured logic of my grief, I believed I had failed him. I was driving. I should have seen the other car. I should have swerved. I should have done something, anything, differently. My survival felt like a betrayal, and the silence became my vow. I would walk through the rest of my life in quiet contrition, a living memorial to the voice that had been extinguished beside me. I would pour everything I had, my energy, my love, my very identity, into our son, the last living piece of David. It was a noble, tragic narrative I had constructed for myself. And for a long time, it sustained me. But sitting there, in that cheap hotel room, discarded by the very person my sacrifice was meant to serve, the narrative crumbled into dust. It wasn't noble. It was self-destructive. I hadn't been honoring David. I had been punishing myself, and in doing so, I had allowed my son to believe that my silence was a sign of weakness, that my love was a resource to be endlessly exploited, and that my presence was disposable. The weight of that realization was suffocating. I lay back on the unfamiliar pillows, closed my eyes, and for the first time since the accident, I wept. I wept for my lost husband, for my lost voice, for the lost years, and for the son who had looked at my life's devotion and priced it at less than a home gym. The shift began with the buzz of my phone on the nightstand. I let it vibrate several times, the sound an unwelcome intrusion into my cocoon of misery. Finally, I reached for it, expecting a text from Leo, perhaps a perfunctory, guilt-driven message asking if I had settled in at Willow Creek. But it wasn't Leo. It was Lily. A video call. My finger hovered over the screen. Seeing her bright, innocent face felt like it would break me. But my love for her was a reflex, stronger than my own despair. I answered the call. Her face filled the screen, her brow furrowed with a worry that was far too old for her 9 years. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Mom said you went to the new place. Are you okay? I miss you." The simple, honest words were a key turning a lock deep inside me. I tried to smile for her, a watery, pathetic attempt, and gave a small nod. She wasn't fooled. "Dad is turning your room into an office," she said, her voice dropping lower, full of a child's outrage at the unfairness of the adult world. "He's already moving your stuff into boxes and putting them in the garage. He said you won't need it anymore." The garage. David's desk, my mother's sewing basket, the albums filled with pictures of a life I had actually lived, all relegated to a concrete box next to the lawnmower and forgotten bicycles. Something inside me, something that had been cold and numb for days, ignited. It was a tiny spark at first, a flicker of outrage, but Lily's words were the kindling. "It's not right, Grandma," she said, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I told them it was mean, and they told me to go to my room." That was it. That was the moment. The numbness receded, replaced by a slow-burning fire. It was the righteous, incandescent rage of a mother whose child had been hurt, but this time, the child was me. I ended the call with Lily, promising to text her later, my fingers moving with a newfound purpose. I got up from the bed, went to the small suitcase that held the most important parts of my life, and pulled out a heavy, accordion-style file folder. The receipts. I sat at the small, laminate desk in the corner of the hotel room and opened the folder. For the next several hours, I conducted an audit of my own life. I spread the documents across the bed, a patchwork quilt of sacrifice. There was the confirmation of the wire transfer for the $75,000. The title of the silver sedan, signed over to Leo. Bank statements stretching back 15 years, with transfers to his account highlighted in yellow, rent support, car insurance, new suit for interviews, and then there were the mortgage statements. After my son's initial effusive gratitude for the down payment, the reality of a 30-year mortgage had quickly set in. I remembered the phone call, 3 years into their life in the new house. Leo's voice was strained. "Mom, we are in a bit of a bind. My bonus wasn't what I expected, and Monica's commission fell through. We might be late on the mortgage." I had calmed his panic, logged into my account, and made the payment for him. I had told myself it was a one-time thing. But it wasn't. It became a pattern. A quiet understanding. Whenever things were tight, which they always seemed to be, I would get a stressed phone call or a vague text, and I would log on and transfer the money. A silent, steady infusion of cash that papered over their financial irresponsibility and funded their lifestyle. I started counting the payments I'd made on their behalf. I tallied them up on a hotel notepad, the pen scratching furiously. 38 mortgage payments. I did the math. I had paid for more than 3 years of their life in that house. I circled the number. 38, then I wrote down the other figures. $75,000. $50,000 for his MBA, which he'd conveniently forgotten I had financed. I stared at the numbers on the page, a cold, hard accounting of my love. And I realized my silence had not been a vow of penance. It had been a catastrophic business error. I had invested everything in a failing asset. The rage was no longer a spark, it was a furnace, burning away the fog of grief and servitude, leaving behind a core of diamond-hard clarity. He hadn't just kicked me out. He had foreclosed on his own mother. And I decided then and there, in that sterile hotel room, that the debt was coming due. The plan did not arrive in a flash of inspiration. It grew slowly, organically, out of the ashes of my old life. It started with David's desk. The real one, the one I had insisted on taking with me, which now sat in a storage unit I had rented under my own name. The thought of it sitting in Leo's garage, destined to be covered in dust and cobwebs, was unbearable. That desk wasn't just furniture, it was an altar. It was where David had spun words into worlds, where he had built his reputation as one of the city's most respected journalists, and later, a beloved local author. It was also where I had performed my own secret act of creation. After the accident, his publisher had approached me about his final, unfinished manuscript. It was a book about unsung local heroes, a collection of profiles on ordinary people doing extraordinary things. He had been so passionate about it. The thought of it remaining incomplete was another layer of grief I couldn't bear. So, in the dead of night, fueled by coffee and sorrow, I had sat at his desk and I had finished it. I submerged myself in his notes, his research, his style. I channeled his voice, his cadence, his compassion. I wrote the final 3 chapters, my fingers flying across the keyboard, the words pouring out of me in a torrent of silent tribute. When I sent the finished manuscript to his editor, I said I had simply compiled his notes. No one ever questioned it. The book, The Heart of the City, became a posthumous bestseller, cementing David's legacy. It was my secret, a final, intimate collaboration between me and my husband. That memory, long suppressed, returned to me with stunning force in the hotel room. I had a voice. It wasn't in my throat, but it was on those pages. I had his contacts, too. His old Rolodex, a relic from another time, was tucked away in one of the desk drawers. I had packed it myself. The next morning, I took a taxi to the storage unit. The roll of the metal door was a thunderclap announcing a new beginning. There it was, my life, in neatly stacked boxes. I ran my hand over the cool, smooth wood of the desk, a jolt of energy passing through my fingertips. I found the Rolodex and took it back to the hotel. I spent the afternoon flipping through the worn cards, seeing the names of editors, producers, and television hosts, people who had admired David, who had sung his praises at his memorial. My son saw me as a mute, feeble old woman. These people remembered me as Alara Jensen, the brilliant, witty wife of a local icon. They remembered my voice. An idea began to form, audacious and terrifying. Leo and Monica had discarded me because I was an inconvenience, an embarrassing secret. What if I stopped being a secret? What if I told my story? Not as a victim, but as a survivor. As one of the unsung heroes my husband used to write about. The silent generation of women who built families, supported careers, and paid for houses, only to be deemed obsolete when their utility ran out. The furnace of my anger was now forging a weapon. I stood in front of the cheap mirror, above the hotel room dresser, and I looked at myself. Really looked. The face that stared back was tired, lined with grief, but the eyes were clear. The fire was there. I opened my mouth. I tried to make a sound, any sound. A dry, scratchy croak emerged, pathetic and weak. It hurt. It felt like tearing something rusted and fused together. I tried again, pushing air from my diaphragm, focusing on the memory of David's name. David, I rasped. The sound was a ghost, a threadbare echo of what it once was, but it was there. It was a start. For the next week, I practiced. I spoke to the empty room, my voice growing stronger, clearer, less painful with each passing day. I read passages from David's book aloud, letting his words retrain my tongue, his strength reinforcing mine. I was not just reclaiming my voice. I was reclaiming myself. The blanket of silence, once a comfort, then a prison, was now a cloak of invisibility I was about to cast off. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that when I finally spoke, the whole world, and especially my son, was going to hear me. The execution of the plan required a calm precision I hadn't felt in years. It was the same focus I used when balancing David's portfolios, a cool, detached assessment of assets and strategy. My primary asset was David's name. I found the business card of a woman named Sarah Gable, a producer for City Sunrise, the most popular morning show in the region. Sarah had been a cub reporter when David was at the peak of his career, and he had been a mentor to her. I remembered her at the funeral, her eyes filled with genuine sorrow. I composed an email on my laptop, the words chosen with surgical care. I introduced myself as David Jensen's widow. I didn't mention my mutism or my current situation. Instead, I pitched a segment. I wrote about David's last book, The Heart of the City, and how its theme of celebrating quiet, local heroes was more relevant than ever. I proposed a story on a topic I framed as the silent pillars, focusing on the often invisible contributions of the older generation to their families and communities. I suggested that I could share some of David's unpublished notes and insights, and perhaps tell a story or two that didn't make it into the book. It was bait, and I dangled it perfectly. Sarah replied within an hour. Her email was warm, effusive, full of fond memories of David. She loved the idea. A segment on honoring our elders' hidden sacrifices. Alara, that's beautiful. It's exactly the kind of heartfelt content we need right now. David would be so proud. We arranged a phone call for the following day. That was the first hurdle. I spent the entire night drinking warm tea with honey and whispering passages from Shakespeare into the darkness, exercising my vocal cords like an athlete preparing for a marathon. When I dialed her number the next morning, my heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hand was steady. "Sarah Gable," she answered, her voice exactly as I remembered it from the television, brisk and professional. "Hello, Sarah," I said. My voice came out clear and measured, with only a slight, gravelly undertone that I hoped she would attribute to age. "This is Alara Jensen." There was a pause on the other end. "Alara. It is so wonderful to hear your voice after all these years." The relief was so profound I nearly sagged against the wall. She remembered me, voice and all. The rest of the conversation was easy. We set a date for the taping. It would be live in 1 week's time. The week passed in a blur of focused preparation. I used some of the funds from my private accounts Leo had no idea existed, to prepare myself for battle. I went to a salon for the first time in a decade, having my silver hair cut and styled into a sophisticated bob. I bought a new outfit, a tailored blazer in a deep sapphire blue, a simple silk shell, and classic grey trousers. It was armor. When I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw a faded, forgotten old woman. I saw Alara Jensen. I saw a force to be reckoned with. The day of the interview, a car service, sent by the station, picked me up from the hotel. As we drove towards the downtown studio, I felt a strange sense of calm. The fear and anxiety had been burned away by the fire of my resolve. I was not a woman seeking revenge. I was a woman seeking justice. The studio was a whirlwind of controlled chaos, technicians rushing past, cameras gliding silently across the floor, bright lights humming overhead. Sarah greeted me with a warm hug. "You look incredible, Alara," she said, her eyes scanning me with professional approval. She led me to the set, a cheerful-looking living room arrangement with 2 plush armchairs and a coffee table. As a sound technician clipped a tiny microphone to my blazer, I caught my reflection in a dark monitor screen. I looked poised. I looked strong. I looked like a woman who had a story to tell. And I was about to tell it to the entire city. The studio lights were hot, but I felt a cool, crystalline calm settle over me. Sarah Gable sat across from me, her professional smile warm and encouraging. The theme music for City Sunrise faded, a red light on the camera in front of me blinked on, and we were live. "Welcome back to City Sunrise," Sarah began, turning to face the camera. "We are so honored to have a very special guest in the studio with us this morning. Many of you will remember her late husband, the brilliant and beloved author David Jensen. Please welcome Alara Jensen." She turned to me, her smile softening. "Alara, thank you so much for being here." "It's been too long," I returned her smile, a genuine one this time. "Thank you for having me, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here." The interview started gently. We spoke about David, about his work, about his final book. I shared a few charming, pre-planned anecdotes about his writing process, stories that painted a picture of the man the city adored. I could feel myself relaxing into the rhythm of the conversation, my voice holding steady and true. I imagined Leo and Monica, just starting their day. They sometimes watched City Sunrise while they had their coffee. The thought sent a jolt of pure, vindictive adrenaline through me. His final book, The Heart of the City, was about celebrating the unsung heroes in our midst, Sarah said, expertly guiding the conversation toward my intended topic. "You mentioned when we spoke that you felt that was a more important message now than ever." This was my opening. I took a deliberate sip of water from the glass on the table, gathering my thoughts. "Yes, I do," I began, looking directly into the lens of the main camera, imagining I was speaking to every person who had ever felt invisible. David believed that our communities are built on a foundation of quiet, unseen sacrifices. The sacrifices of parents, of grandparents, of spouses. The people who put their own dreams on hold to build a future for someone else. They pay for the education, they provide the down payment on the first home, they offer a lifetime of support, and they do it silently, without asking for recognition. I let the words hang in the air for a moment. Sarah was leaning forward, her expression rapt. "That's a beautiful thought," she said. "It sounds like you're speaking from personal experience." Her question was the final key, unlocking the door I had been waiting to open. I said, my voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate, more confessional. I kept my tone calm, factual, devoid of self-pity. That was crucial. This was not a plea for sympathy, it was a statement of fact. For the last 22 years, since my husband's death, I have been silent. A trauma-induced condition. My family grew accustomed to my silence. They built their lives on my silent support. I was the financial cornerstone, the emotional bedrock, the quiet, convenient fixture in the background of their successful lives. I could see a flicker of shock in Sarah's eyes. But she was a consummate professional, and let me continue. But recently, I went on, my gaze unwavering, my presence became inconvenient. An old piece of furniture that no longer fit the decor. I was told my room was needed for a home office and a Pilates studio. I was told a lovely senior residence had been found for me. I was thanked for my service, and I was discarded. A stunned silence fell over the studio. Even the normally bustling crew in the periphery had gone still. I didn't need to name my son. I had given the entire city a portrait of him, painted with the details of his own selfish cruelty. I tell this story, I concluded, my voice ringing with a strength that felt ancient and new at the same time, not for pity, but as a warning. Elder abuse doesn't always look like what you see in the news. Sometimes it's quieter. It's a story of being rendered invisible. It's the slow, steady erosion of dignity. So, look at the silent pillars in your own lives. See them. Acknowledge their sacrifice. Because the foundation they provide is not guaranteed forever. And once it's gone, the house you've built for yourself might just collapse. In my mind's eye, I saw my phone, sitting on the hotel nightstand. I could almost feel it vibrating, a furious, panicked tremor. "Mom, what are you doing?" The imaginary text flashed behind my eyes. "This is a private family matter." Then, the inevitable, desperate plea, "Call me now." But I couldn't call him. I was on live television, reclaiming my voice, my story, and my life. The red light on the camera went off. The segment was over. Sarah stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, before she seemed to remember where she was. "We'll be right back," she managed to say to the camera, her voice choked with emotion. Then she turned to me, her eyes shining with tears and a fierce, newfound respect. "Elara," she whispered. My God. The car service dropped me not at the hotel, but at the curb of the house I had paid for. My house. I still had the key. Monica had insisted I keep, for emergencies. This, I decided, qualified. I walked up the stone pathway, past the perfectly manicured flower beds that I had planted one sunny afternoon years ago, and I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, definitive click. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was quiet, but it was the charged, humming quiet of a brewing storm. I heard their voices from the living room, sharp and panicked. "I can't get her on the phone. It just goes to voicemail." That was Leo, his voice tight with fury and fear. "My mother just called me," Monica shrieked, her voice a shrill, ugly thing. She saw it. Everyone saw it. They are all calling. What are we going to do? I walked into the room. They both spun around, their faces a mask of disbelief and rage. Leo looked as if he'd seen a ghost. A ghost who could talk. "Mom," he choked out, his phone still clutched in his hand. "What the hell did you just do?" Monica's face was blotchy and red. How could you, she hissed, taking a step towards me. You went on television and you humiliated us. You aired our private life for the entire city to see. I stood there for a moment, letting their frantic energy wash over me. I felt nothing but a profound, detached calm. The fear was gone. The anger had served its purpose and now resided within me as a cool, hard core of resolve. Your private life? I asked, my voice even and low. It echoed in the cavernous, high-ceilinged room, a sound they had never heard there before. You mean the private life that I funded? The private life lived within walls that I paid for. That is not true. Leo shot back, his denial a desperate reflex. We pay the mortgage. Do you? I asked, raising a single, questioning eyebrow. Do you really? Because my bank statements tell a different story. 38. That's the number of mortgage payments I have made on your behalf, Leo. Shall we discuss the $75,000 down payment? Or perhaps the $50,000 loan for your MBA, which you swore you would repay? I spoke the numbers like bullets, each one finding its mark. Leo paled, his bravado crumbling. He looked at Monica, who stared back at him, a horrified, dawning comprehension on her face. Her perfectly curated world was fracturing right before her eyes. This isn't about money, Leo stammered, trying a different tactic. This is about family. You're my mother. Yes, I am, I said softly. And you are my son. The son who decided my 22 years of silent devotion were worth less than a room for a Peloton bike. I took a step closer, into the center of the room. You mistook my silence for stupidity, Leo. You mistook my generosity for weakness. You thought you could just put me away in a box, like my furniture in your garage, and forget about me. Just then, the front door opened again, and Lily walked in, home from school. She stopped dead, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. Her parents, furious and cornered. And me, her quiet grandmother, standing tall and speaking with a power she had never witnessed. Her gaze met mine, and her face broke into a slow, wondrous smile. She dropped her backpack and ran to me, wrapping her small arms around my waist. I hugged her back fiercely, my anchor in the storm. Her presence solidified my resolve. I looked over her head at my son. The trust fund David left for you, the one I have managed as the sole trustee all these years. It's frozen, as of this morning, I stated calmly. And my lawyer will be in touch tomorrow about structuring a repayment plan for the personal loans I made to you. You wanted this house. Now you can figure out how to pay for it yourselves. Leo stared at me, speechless. The full weight of his actions, the true cost of his carelessness, was finally crashing down on him. For the first time in his adult life, the safety net was gone. And I, the silent woman who had woven it, was the one who had finally, decisively, cut the cord. The weeks that followed were a revelation. It felt like waking from a long, grey dream into a world of vibrant color. I didn't just have my voice back, I had my life back. The sale of my old stocks, combined with the funds I'd reclaimed from Leo's frozen trust, left me more than comfortable. It was my money, earned through my shrewd management, and for the first time, I was spending it on myself. I bought a beautiful condominium in the city's historic district, with high ceilings, large windows, and a small balcony that overlooked a leafy park. It was filled with light. I had David's desk professionally restored and placed it by the window. I filled the walls not with ghosts, but with art. I unpacked the photo albums and displayed them proudly. My space was a reflection of me, of my history and my future. I reconnected with old friends, women I had known in my life with David, who welcomed me back with open arms and marveled at the return of my voice. We had long lunches, went to the theater, took classes. I was no longer Lara, the silent widow. I was just a Lara. My phone calls with Lily became a daily ritual. Hearing her cheerful chatter, now answered with my own laughter, was the sweetest kind of victory. She would tell me about her day, and I would tell her about mine. She visited every weekend, and we would explore the city together, going to museums and bakeries, forging a new relationship, one built on the joy of shared conversation. The story of my television appearance became something of a local legend. I received letters and emails from strangers, mostly women, who saw their own stories reflected in mine. They thanked me for speaking up, for giving voice to their own silent frustrations. Sarah Gable and I became good friends, and she encouraged me to write. I started a blog, sharing my thoughts on life after silence, on financial independence for women, on the art of reclaiming oneself. It turned out, I had a lot to say. One afternoon, a thick envelope arrived. The return address was Leo's. It was the first direct communication I'd had from him since that final confrontation. I opened it with a strange lack of emotion. Inside was a long, rambling letter. It was a pathetic document, a clumsy cocktail of self-pity, blame, and half-hearted apology. He wrote about how hard things were, how Monica was threatening to leave him, how the financial strain was unbearable. He said he was sorry, but the words felt hollow, a strategic maneuver rather than a genuine sentiment. The letter culminated, as I knew it would, in a request. He needed help. He needed me to unfreeze the trust, to just give him a little to get back on his feet. He was my son, after all. I read the letter twice, then I walked over to the sleek, new paper shredder I had bought for my office. I fed the pages into the slot and listened to the satisfying whir as his words were turned into meaningless, confetti-like strips. I felt no anger, no sadness. Just a quiet, resolute peace. The debt had been paid. The ledger was closed. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto my balcony. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. The sounds of the city drifted up to me, the distant murmur of traffic, the laughter of children in the park below, the melody of a saxophone player on a nearby street corner. It was the music of life, a symphony I was finally a part of again. I thought of David, and for the first time, the memory brought only a gentle, loving warmth, not the sharp sting of grief. I knew he would be proud. I had not only protected his legacy, I had finally built my own. I raised my glass to the fading light, to the future stretching out before me, a future of my own making. My name is Alara Jensen. And my voice is finally mine.